McGraw.com, and Tuesdays and Thursdays with us. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, McGraw. Good morning, Kelly.
Are you listening to every morsel of this Netflix table reading of Eric Greitens versus Missouri down in Jefferson City?
Not quite. I do plan to go down and listen at some point, and I've listened to some of the testimony and the reading of the transcript. It's funny. It reminded me. So 2 days ago when they started, they're reading all the transcripts, and they're having this discussion about whether or not they say the dirty words. It reminded me of a House hearing a few years ago when I was in the legislature, and they were debating a bill that was going to ban certain kind of exotic dancing and certain things on billboards. They called it generally the porn bill. And there was a Democrat named Kurt Doherty who was opposed to the bill because he said it violated the First Amendment. And he stood on the floor and just started reading the bill. And it was the end of the session, and at the end of the session, there's always school kids doing tours and in the House and in the Senate, and, watching the debate. And he's just like, Mr. Speaker, this is an important bill. I'm just going to read from the bill so that my colleagues know what we're talking about. And of course, it had all sorts of specific biological terms because of what it was banning, what women had to cover and couldn't display and all of that. He starts reading, and he gets gavelled down and gavelled down and gavelled down, and they try to stop him from saying the dirty words. He said a few, and a couple of those teachers led those children out of the House chambers. So the Missouri Capitol is a dangerous place if you don't want your children to hear dirty words, especially these days.
Your last column, or the last one that I saw, or one of the ones that got my attention, was the one that you wrote that Eric Bruner came out and said, hey, I'm not the guy behind this $100,000 that went to Al Watkins. Well, we learned yesterday that Scott Vaughn, being played by Scott Vaughn in this Netflix series, says it's his money, and it's none of anybody's business where he got that money from.
Yeah, he says it's his money. It became his money as soon as somebody gave it to him. Nobody believes, and it was clear from the lawmakers, they don't believe that Scott Vaughn magically had $120 million or $120,000 in cash laying around his Clayton office, and his testimony was so obviously full of lies. He has three people in his office. One of them is his wife. And he can't remember which one he asked to be the courier to carry some of the $50,000 to Al Watkins. That's just not believable. I guarantee you the person who was asked to be the courier knows who they were or are. And I hope if that person is a journalist, that their resume is out and that they're trying to escape from working at the Missouri Times, because it's no longer a place where journalism is being done.
Well, I mean, he might have broken some journalistic ethics. He might have broken some type of long-held norms, but I don't think he broke any laws. Or did he?
I don't know. I'm unaware if he did. He isn't. As far as I know, he isn't being charged or investigated with breaking any laws related to this. But it just. It's a dirty little part of this. It has nothing to do with whether or not Governor Eric Greitens broke any of the laws that he is accused of breaking. Scott Vaughn wasn't involved in that process. He's merely involved in taking advantage of the process, moving it along, and trying to encourage the governor to resign and encourage the impeachment process and all of that. And one of the reasons that I've written about that is because it does matter. People that spend $120,000 to help the process by which a governor is brought down, regardless of whether or not the governor is responsible for his own actions, those folks want something for their $120,000. That's the reality of politics. People spend a lot of money in politics, and they spend it for a purpose. They want something for that money. The corporate tax cuts that the Missouri legislature passed this year came because a lot of corporate folks wrote checks to make sure that happened. That's how the process of politics is often played. So the source of this $120,000, whether or not Scott Vaughn is ever going to give it up, it does matter, because eventually we're going to see somebody want to pay back for their investment in getting rid of Eric Greitens.
Well, even the Greitens supporters, and I know you get a bunch of email and texts and phones and people talk to you, and the people who support Greitens say, hey, wait a minute, this is a witch hunt. He was going after some developers. They didn't like that they were losing some of their tax benefits, and so they wanted him out. So in a sense, Eric Greitens is saying, or his people are saying, you're right, this $120,000 does matter, and it's all trumped up to get Greitens out because they didn't like him going after their tax cuts.
Well, here's the problem with politics today. Everybody wants everything to be a zero-sum game. And as it relates to what you were just talking about, what I want people to understand is that both A and B can be true. It can be both true, and the evidence indicates that it is, that Governor Eric Greitens was both a creep in his relationship, both cheating on his wife and potentially assaulting this other woman. It can be true that he stole a Missouri Mission Continues donor list and used it on his campaign. It can be true that he violated ethics law. It can be true that all of the things that are leading to his impeachment hearing, that there is evidence to back them, and it's why we're at this place. It can also be true that other people are trying to take advantage of that situation, and that they have some ethical failings of their own. It's not one or the other. It's not, oh, look, there's $120,000, therefore everything is a witch hunt. This is the problem we have in politics today. You're either 100% on the Republican bandwagon or 100% on the Democrat bandwagon. In this case, depending on the day, it's George Soros' fault, it's Kim Gardner's fault, it's Roy Temple's fault, it's the developer's fault, it's Scott Vaughn's fault. Ultimately, everything that Eric Greitens did is Eric Greitens' fault. And that is why we're having these hearings.
Are we going to ever know who's giving him the money for these ads he's running now, or who's paying for his lawyers and all of that? Are we going to ever find that out?
I think possibly yes. And the reason is two different things. One, the House is now suing A New Missouri and the Greitens campaign because they have issued subpoenas and tried to get documents, and because they want to know the money on both sides, and they're trying to get to that. And so far, we don't know what the judge is going to do, but it's quite possible the House's investigation is going to unearth some of where the governor is getting his money, because that matters too. Also, remember, there's this lawsuit going on, this civil lawsuit over the governor's use of Confide, an app that destroys text messages. He is being accused of violating Sunshine Law. There is strong enough evidence that the judge has twice now overruled motions to dismiss that lawsuit. That lawsuit involves a lot of discovery and a lot of information where the attorneys who filed it, Mark Pedroli and Ben Sansone, are seeking information about the kinds of folks that the governor used this Confide app to communicate with, including all of these various nefarious or otherwise dark money committees. And I believe that lawsuit is likely to lead to some sort of disclosure on some of the spending and practices of A New Missouri. So between that lawsuit and the House investigation, I think it's quite likely we're going to get to the bottom of at least some of the governor's secret donors.
Tony Messenger, never a dull moment. Get back to work, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday. Have a good weekend.
Sounds good.